Took you long enough.
6 white women lynched Bumpy Johnson's grandmother in broad daylight, laughing as she died. They thought being white in 1946 South Carolina meant no consequences. But they didn't know her grandson was the most feared gangster in Harlem, 800 miles away. What will Bumpy Johnson do that makes an entire town wake up in terror? To understand how it all led here, we go back to where it truly began. Thursday, July 18, 1946. Harlem, New York City. 10:15 in the morning. 5 men sat around a mahogany table at the Red Rooster Club, the architects of Harlem's underground economy. At the head sat Ellsworth Raymond Bumpy Johnson, 40 years old, dressed in a charcoal gray suit. "The Italians want Lenox Avenue," Bumpy said calmly. "But violence is expensive. Why burn down a house when you can simply change who holds the deed?" This was classic Bumpy Johnson. While everyone else reached for guns, he reached for strategy. Marcus Webb, his second-in-command, stood near the door, former military intelligence completely loyal. By 11:45, the meeting concluded. Bumpy had outlined a plan so elegant the Italian problem would resolve itself within 6 weeks. No war, no bodies, no attention. Bumpy glanced at the clock. 1:25 in the afternoon. "I need to make my call, Marcus." Every Thursday at 2 o'clock for 15 years, without exception, Bumpy called his grandmother in Greenwood, South Carolina. It was sacred, inviolate. "She taught you everything, didn't she?" Marcus asked. Bumpy's expression softened. "She taught me that real power isn't about how hard you can hit. It's about protecting the people you love." What Bumpy didn't know was that 800 miles south, the woman who'd taught him everything was walking toward an encounter that would change everything. That same morning, 800 miles away in Greenwood, South Carolina, Margaret Johnson woke at 6:30, same as she had for the past 50 years. 73 years old, 5 feet tall exactly. Maybe 90 pounds when fully dressed, she moved through her morning routine with the deliberate precision of someone who'd long ago learned that consistency was survival. Coffee first black, no sugar. Then breakfast, usually oatmeal with a handful of berries from the small garden behind her house. She'd read from her Bible the same worn King James translation she'd owned since 1895. Then spend an hour tending to her roses, which everyone in the neighborhood agreed were the most beautiful flowers in Greenwood, despite growing in soil that should have been too poor to support anything so lovely. By 10:30, Margaret was ready for her weekly shopping trip to Miller's General Store on Main Street. She'd been making this same trip every Thursday for decades, buying the same basic necessities: flour, sugar, a bit of salt pork vegetables, if they looked fresh, maybe a small luxury like peppermint candies, if she felt particularly indulgent. Her eyesight wasn't what it used to be. Cataracts had been slowly clouding her vision for the past 3 years, turning the world into something soft-edged and indistinct. But she knew every crack in every sidewalk, knew every storefront, knew the route so thoroughly that failing eyes barely mattered. She carried her worn canvas shopping bag and walked with the careful, measured steps of someone acutely aware that a fall at 73 could mean death. Her wooden cane, the one that had belonged to her late husband, clicked rhythmically against the pavement. Margaret was thinking about her grandson. Ellsworth would be calling this afternoon, same as always. He'd ask about her health, about the house, about whether she needed anything. She'd tell him she was fine, that everything was good, that he worried too much. Then they'd talk for 30 minutes about nothing and everything, the comfortable conversation of 2 people who loved each other, without complication or condition. She didn't fully understand what Ellsworth did in New York. Knew it was dangerous, knew it was probably illegal, knew he'd become someone powerful and feared. But he was still her baby. Still, the sweet, intelligent boy she'd raised after his mother died, still the child who'd cried in her arms when the neighborhood boys called him Bumpy because of a growth on the back of his head. What she didn't know, what she couldn't have anticipated, was that 3 blocks away, 6 white women were gathering at the Greenwood Women's Social Club, and one of them was about to have the worst day of her life, a day so terrible that she'd decide to take that rage and humiliation out on the first vulnerable target she encountered. At 2:15 in the afternoon, Margaret walked past the Women's Social Club, her mind on the shopping she'd just completed, on the phone call she'd receive in 45 minutes, on the simple, comfortable rhythm of a life lived quietly in a town that had never been kind to people who looked like her, but had at least, for the most part, left her alone. She didn't see Eleanor Pritchard standing on the sidewalk directly in her path, distracted and furious, fresh from a devastating conversation with her husband. The collision was minor, completely accidental. Margaret's shoulder bumped Eleanor's arm. Nothing forceful, nothing intentional, just the inevitable result of failing eyesight and unfortunate positioning. Margaret immediately stopped, her heart sinking with familiar dread. "Oh my, I'm so terribly sorry, ma'am. I didn't see you there. My eyes aren't what they used to be. Please forgive me. I meant absolutely no disrespect or harm." Her voice was deferential, apologetic, carrying the particular tone that elderly black people in 1946 South Carolina had perfected through necessity. Not quite servile, but careful, respectful, non-threatening, the voice of someone who understood that the wrong inflection could mean disaster. Eleanor Pritchard, 52 years old, wife of Deputy Sheriff Robert Pritchard, prominent member of the Baptist Church and the Women's Social Club, stared at Margaret with eyes that held something far more dangerous than simple anger. Eleanor's husband had just informed her that morning that he was being demoted, transferred to a lesser position, because of complaints about his conduct. 23 years as the deputy sheriff's wife, 23 years of status and respect and fear, and now she was being humiliated, reduced, made ordinary. She'd spent the past hour at the social club, trying to maintain composure while 5 other women, her supposed friends, barely concealed their delight at her family's downfall. They'd offered sympathy that felt like mockery, condolence that sounded like celebration. Eleanor was a woman whose entire identity depended on status, on being above others, on the power that came from her husband's position. And that power was crumbling. So when this elderly black woman bumped into her, something inside Eleanor didn't just crack. It shattered completely. "You touched me," Eleanor said, her voice rising to a volume designed for an audience. "You put your hands on me, on a white woman." Margaret's blood went cold. "Ma'am, I apologize sincerely. It was entirely accidental. I'm just an old woman with poor eyesight. Please, I meant no offense whatsoever." But Eleanor wasn't interested in apologies. 5 other white women from the social club were now gathering around them, sensing drama, sensing opportunity, sensing the particular kind of entertainment that came from exercising power over someone powerless to resist. Patricia Crawford, 48 years old, wife of the bank president. Virginia Morrison, 45 years old, wife of the school superintendent. Catherine Walsh, 51 years old, wife of the county clerk. Judith Brennan, 47 years old, wife of the fire chief. Sarah Hendricks, 44 years old, wife of the mayor's chief of staff. 6 women, all prominent, all respectable, all members of the same social circle that determined who mattered and who didn't in Greenwood's white community. And all of them in that moment saw Margaret Johnson not as a person, but as an opportunity to reassert control over a world that felt increasingly uncertain. "She assaulted you, Eleanor," Patricia said, her voice carrying theatrical outrage. "We all saw it. She grabbed you deliberately." Margaret's hands were shaking. "No, ma'am, I promise you it was an accident. I would never intentionally—" "Are you calling us liars?" Virginia interrupted, stepping closer. "Are you saying that 6 white women are lying?" Thomas Washington, 32 years old, who worked at Morrison's hardware store across the street, was taking his afternoon break. He saw what was happening, saw an elderly black woman surrounded by 6 white women whose body language promised violence. Thomas had known Mrs. Margaret for years. She shopped at Morrison's regularly, was always kind, always respectful, always treated everyone with dignity, regardless of their position. He knew she was Bumpy Johnson's grandmother, though she rarely mentioned it except with quiet pride when talking about how well her grandson was doing up north. Thomas started to move toward them to intervene to help, but his wife's voice echoed in his head from a conversation they'd had just weeks ago. "Baby, you cannot save everyone. And if you try, you'll leave our children without a father." So Thomas did something else. Something that might not save Mrs. Margaret in this moment, but might possibly mean that what was about to happen wouldn't go unanswered. He pulled out the small camera he kept in his jacket pocket, a Kodak Brownie he'd bought 2 years ago and had been teaching himself to use. And from across the street, hands trembling, heart pounding with fear and fury and helplessness, Thomas Washington began documenting what happened next. Eleanor grabbed Margaret's arm fingers, digging in hard enough to leave bruises. "We're going to teach you a lesson about respecting your betters." The 6 women dragged Margaret into the alley that ran between Morrison's Hardware and Greenwood National Bank, away from the main street, away from witnesses who might object, away from anyone who might remember that beneath the hatred and the history and the horrible normalcy of racial violence, there was still such a thing as basic human decency. Margaret didn't scream, didn't fight back, didn't resist. She was 73 years old, weighed 90 pounds, and had survived 7 decades in the Jim Crow South by understanding exactly when resistance meant death and when submission meant survival. But this time, submission wouldn't be enough. The alley was cool and shadowed, the afternoon sun blocked by the buildings on either side. Margaret stumbled as they pushed her deeper into the darkness, her cane falling from her hand, clattering against the brick pavement with a sound that seemed impossibly loud. Eleanor slapped Margaret across the face hard enough that the elderly woman's head snapped sideways. "You don't touch white women. You don't look at white women. You don't exist in the same world as white women unless we permit it." Margaret tasted blood, felt her legs weakening. "Please," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Please, I'm just an old woman. I have a grandson who loves me. Please don't do this." Patricia kicked Margaret's cane further away, watching it skitter across the alley floor. "Your grandson? And what's he going to do about it? Come down from wherever he is and complain. File a report with the police." She laughed and the others joined in. What happened next unfolded across 11 brutal minutes that would fundamentally alter the trajectory of dozens of lives and reshape how violence and power and consequence functioned in that corner of South Carolina. The 6 women beat Margaret with fists and feet, striking an elderly woman who weighed less than any of them, who couldn't defend herself, who'd done nothing except exist in the wrong place, with the wrong skin color, at the wrong moment. They pushed her down, kicked her when she tried to crawl away, laughed when she begged them to stop. Thomas Washington across the street continued photographing, tears streaming down his face, his entire body shaking with rage and helplessness. He captured image after image, knowing each photograph might be evidence, might be proof, might be the only record that this happened, that 6 respectable white women decided that beating an elderly black woman was acceptable entertainment on a Thursday afternoon. At 2:47, Eleanor made a decision that would seal her fate and the fate of her 5 companions. "We need rope," she said, breathing hard from the exertion of violence. "We're going to teach every person in this town what happens when they forget their place." Catherine ran back to Morrison's Hardware, walked right past Thomas without seeing him, and demanded rope from Mr. Henderson, the store owner. He handed it over without question, without hesitation, because in 1946 South Carolina, a white woman asking for rope in the middle of the afternoon required no explanation and certainly no refusal. By 2:50, they'd dragged Margaret to a large oak tree at the end of the alley, an ancient tree that had probably witnessed similar atrocities before that had stood silent while countless acts of casual cruelty unfolded beneath its branches. Margaret was barely conscious. Her face was swollen and bloody ribs were certainly broken. She could barely breathe through the pain. But in her fading awareness, she managed to do one final thing. The necklace Ellsworth had sent her 5 years ago, a delicate silver chain with a small locket containing his photograph, slipped from her neck as they manhandled her toward the tree. She felt it fall, managed to kick it slightly with her foot, pushing it into a crack between 2 bricks, where it might not be immediately visible, where someone searching carefully might find it later. It was the only evidence she could leave, the only message she could send. I was here. This happened to me, and someone who loved me might want to know. At 2:52 in the afternoon, 6 white women lynched Margaret Johnson, 73 years old, grandmother of one of the most powerful black men in America, in an alley in downtown Greenwood, South Carolina, because she had accidentally bumped into one of them on the street. Margaret died within 3 minutes, her small body going still. Her suffering finally ended. The 6 women stepped back, looked at what they'd done, and felt satisfaction. Eleanor adjusted her hair. Patricia smoothed her dress. They walked back toward Main Street, resumed their shopping, discussed dress patterns and dinner plans, acted like absolutely nothing extraordinary had happened. Because to them, nothing extraordinary had happened. This was just Thursday afternoon in South Carolina. Just another lesson taught, just another reminder of how power worked and who held it. Thomas Washington waited until they were gone, then ran. Not toward Margaret, because she was beyond help, now beyond saving, beyond anything except burial and grief. He ran toward the colored section of town, toward the boarding house where there was a telephone, toward the only thing he could still do that might matter. At 3:15 in the afternoon, while Bumpy Johnson sat in his Harlem apartment, waiting for his grandmother's weekly call, Thomas Washington was speaking frantically to a telephone operator, trying to get a long-distance connection to New York City, trying to reach someone, anyone who could tell Bumpy Johnson what had just happened to the woman he loved most in the world. The call went through multiple operators, was transferred 3 times, cost more money than Thomas made in a week. But finally, at 3:47 in the afternoon, Marcus Webb's voice came through the crackling connection. Webb residence. Thomas's voice was shaking so badly he could barely form words. Sir, my name is Thomas Washington. I'm calling from Greenwood, South Carolina. I need to speak with Mr. Bumpy Johnson. It's about his grandmother, Mrs. Margaret Johnson. Sir, something terrible has happened. Something absolutely terrible. Marcus's entire body went rigid. Hold the line. Don't hang up. Stay exactly where you are. Marcus set down the phone and walked quickly, not running, because running would alert everyone in the building that something was wrong, toward Bumpy's office where he was finishing paperwork from the morning's meeting. Bumpy looked up as Marcus entered, immediately registering the expression on his lieutenant's face. What's wrong? There's a call from South Carolina, a man named Thomas Washington. He says something's happened to your grandmother. The world tilted. Bumpy stood up, his movements careful, and controlled his face, revealing nothing, even as his heart began hammering against his ribs like it was trying to escape his chest. He walked to the phone, picked up the receiver, his hand steady despite everything. This is Bumpy Johnson. Tell me what happened. Thomas told him everything. The accidental collision, the 6 white women, the alley, the beating, the rope, the oak tree. He told Bumpy about the photographs he'd taken, about the necklace he'd found, and retrieved, about how Margaret's last words had mentioned a grandson who wouldn't forgive them. Bumpy listened without interrupting, without speaking, without making a single sound. Marcus stood nearby, watching his boss's face remain perfectly still, perfectly composed, perfectly blank. When Thomas finished, silence filled the line for 15, 20, 25 seconds. Finally, Bumpy spoke, his voice so quiet that Marcus had to strain to hear it. Mr. Washington, I need you to get those photographs developed immediately. I need you to retrieve that necklace and keep it somewhere safe. I need you to write down the names of all 6 women. Can you do that? Yes, sir. I already have their names. Eleanor Pritchard, Patricia Crawford, Virginia Morrison, Catherine Walsh, Judith Brennan, Sarah Hendricks. All of them are wives of prominent men in town. Sir, I'm so sorry. I tried to help, tried to do something, but you did exactly what you should have done. Bumpy interrupted. You documented everything. You're a witness. You kept evidence. You called me. That took more courage than you probably understand. Mr. Johnson, what are you going to do? The silence stretched out again. When Bumpy finally answered, his voice carried a quality that made Marcus's blood run cold. I'm going to do what my grandmother taught me, Mr. Washington. I'm going to protect my family. The fact that I'm doing it after she's already gone doesn't change the principle. Those 6 women made a decision today. They decided that hurting an elderly black woman carried no consequences. I'm going to teach them and everyone else in Greenwood, South Carolina, that they were catastrophically wrong about that assumption. Bumpy hung up the phone and turned to Marcus. His face was still perfectly calm, perfectly controlled, but his eyes held something Marcus had never seen before. Not rage, not grief, not fury. Something colder, something final. Marcus, cancel everything on my schedule for the next week. Everything. I don't care what it is, who it involves, how important anyone thinks it is. Cancel all of it. Done. What do you need, Moo? I need you to call Isabella Moreau in New Orleans. I need you to call Sam Pierce in Philadelphia. I need you to call Antoine Bogart in Charleston. I need you to call everyone we've ever worked with, everyone who's ever owed us a favor, everyone who has the skills and the stomach for what I'm about to ask them to do. Marcus pulled out his notebook. How many people are we talking about? 7. I need 7 people who are the absolute best at what they do. Money is no object. Logistics are no excuse. I need them assembled and operational in South Carolina within 12 hours. Can you make that happen? Yes. What are they going to do when they get there? Bumpy walked to the window, looked out at Harlem, stretching away in all directions. This kingdom he'd built through intelligence and strategy, and an almost supernatural ability to outthink everyone around him. He'd built all of this without becoming the kind of monster who killed indiscriminately, without becoming the thing he'd fought against his entire life. But some lines once crossed demanded responses that transcended strategy. Those 6 women are going to die, Marcus. All 6 of them. Tonight. Before sunrise tomorrow morning. I want them found in a way that sends a very specific message to everyone in Greenwood and everyone else in the South who thinks that murdering elderly black women is acceptable behavior. He turned back to face Marcus, and his expression was absolutely certain, absolutely final. My grandmother taught me that real power is protecting the people you love. She's gone now. I failed to protect her, but I can still make absolutely certain that the people who killed her understand the cost of what they've done. I can make Greenwood, South Carolina remember this day for the next 100 years. I can teach the entire South that some people, some families, some lines are absolutely untouchable regardless of the color of their skin or where they live or what century we're living in. Marcus nodded slowly. What's the timeline? Sunrise is at 6:14 tomorrow morning. I want all 6 of them dead and their bodies displayed publicly before the sun comes up. That gives us less than 16 hours from this moment. Can we do it? We can do it, Marcus confirmed. It'll be expensive, complicated, and risky. But we can do it. Then make it happen. Use whatever resources necessary. Pay whatever prices need to be paid. Call in every favor we have. But Marcus, I want this done perfectly. No witnesses, no evidence that leads back to us or anyone we work with, no mistakes. These women need to die, and their deaths need to teach a lesson that resonates for generations. Marcus headed for the door, already mentally organizing the dozens of phone calls he'd need to make, the logistics he'd need to coordinate, the people he'd need to mobilize. He paused at the threshold and looked back at Bumpy. Are you certain about this? Once we start, there's no calling it back. Bumpy's response was immediate and absolute. Marcus, cancel everything. Mobilize everyone. Call the best people we know. I'm going to teach the South a lesson they'll be telling their grandchildren about. Nobody touches my family. Nobody. And if they do, the consequences will be so swift, so devastating, so publicly visible that nobody will ever make that mistake again. This isn't revenge, Marcus. This is education. I'm going to teach Greenwood, South Carolina, what happens when you cross the one line that should never, ever be crossed. 4:17 in the afternoon. Bumpy's office in Harlem. Marcus had left to begin making calls. The door closed behind him with a soft click that seemed impossibly loud in the sudden silence. Bumpy Johnson sat alone at his desk, completely still, hands folded in front of him, face revealing absolutely nothing. This was the moment that separated pretenders from true power. Anyone could rage, could scream, could throw things, and make threats. Rage was easy, natural, expected. But rage was also stupid, inefficient, prone to mistakes that got people caught or killed or both. Bumpy didn't rage. Instead, he pulled out a clean sheet of paper and began to draw 6 names: Eleanor Pritchard, Patricia Crawford, Virginia Morrison, Catherine Walsh, Judith Brennan, Sarah Hendricks. He wrote each name carefully, his handwriting precise and controlled. Beside each name, he began adding information that Marcus would gather over the next few hours. Addresses, daily routines, family structures, security considerations, vulnerabilities. This wasn't a hit list. This was an architectural blueprint for consequences. He worked methodically for 45 minutes, creating a diagram that mapped out exactly how 6 prominent white women in a small South Carolina town would cease to exist before sunrise tomorrow. Not out of hatred, not out of rage, but out of the simple mathematical certainty that some actions demanded responses so absolute that they became educational. His grandmother's voice echoed in his memory. Real power is protecting the people you love. She was gone now. He'd failed to protect her. But he could still protect her memory, could still ensure that her death taught the lesson she'd tried to teach him his entire life. That every person mattered. That violence against the innocent carried costs. That power without accountability was just tyranny waiting to be corrected. By 5:15, Marcus returned with 3 pages of detailed intelligence gathered through their network of contacts throughout the South. Bumpy reviewed everything, made notes, adjusted his diagram. "I need 2 more people," Bumpy said quietly. "Not just anyone. I need Isabella Moreau and Samuel Pierce. Can you reach them?" Marcus's eyebrows rose slightly. Isabella Bella Moreau was a legend in certain circles. Creole woman from New Orleans, 34 years old, former OSS operative during the war, specialist in operations that officially never happened. She'd worked with Bumpy twice before on situations that required absolute precision and complete deniability. Samuel Pierce was equally formidable. Former Army Ranger, 41 years old, had conducted operations behind enemy lines in Europe that earned him 3 medals he couldn't publicly acknowledge. After the war, he'd transitioned to private work, handling problems for people who had the money and the discretion to hire the best. "Bella's expensive," Marcus noted. "And Sam doesn't take jobs on short notice unless—" "Tell them what happened," Bumpy interrupted. "Tell them exactly what 6 white women did to a 73-year-old grandmother in broad daylight. Tell them I need people who understand that some operations aren't about money. They're about sending messages that need to be heard 100 years from now." Marcus nodded and left again. Bumpy returned to his diagram, refining details, anticipating problems, creating contingencies. The phone rang at 6:43 in the evening. Bumpy answered. A woman's voice came through smooth and precise with a hint of Louisiana accent that she'd never quite lost. "Mr. Johnson, Marcus told me what happened to your grandmother. I'm very sorry for your loss. And yes, I'll take the job. No fee. This one's personal." "Bella," Bumpy said quietly. I need more than execution. I need theater. I need Greenwood, South Carolina to wake up tomorrow morning and understand that the world changed overnight. There was a pause. When Bella spoke again, her voice carried a quality that made it clear why she was worth every dollar she usually charged. I have an idea. It's bold, probably excessive, definitely memorable. 6 women, 6 trash bags placed in front of the building where they held their social club meetings, public display, impossible to ignore, message received by everyone who matters. Bumpy closed his eyes. His grandmother would have hated this. She'd taught him that violence should be a last resort, that wisdom meant finding solutions that didn't require bloodshed. But she was gone, murdered by women who thought her life had no value, who laughed while she died, who returned to shopping like killing an elderly woman was nothing more than a brief interruption in their Thursday afternoon. "Do it," Bumpy said. "But Bella, I need them to know why. Before they die, they need to understand exactly what they did and exactly who they did it to." "Understood. That's not just execution, Mr. Johnson. That's education." "I can work with that." She hung up. 10 minutes later, Sam Pierce called. His voice was gravelly, direct, no wasted words. "I'm in. When and where?" "Charleston, South Carolina, tonight. You'll be working with Bella Moreau and a team she's assembling. Timeline is tight. Sunrise is 6:14 tomorrow morning. All 6 targets need to be neutralized and displayed before dawn. That's less than 12 hours. I know. Can you do it?" "Yes. Anything else I should know?" Bumpy thought for a moment. "Sam, my grandmother taught me that real power is protecting people. She's gone. I failed. But I can still make absolutely certain that the people who killed her understand that some lines can't be crossed. Make it clean, make it professional, but make it unforgettable." "Understood. Consider it done." The pieces were moving. Marcus coordinated logistics while Bumpy sat in his office still and silent, watching the sun set over Harlem and thinking about an elderly woman in South Carolina who'd loved him without condition and died without justice. Not anymore. Justice was coming, swift, precise, and absolutely final. By 8:30 that evening, the team was assembled. 7 people total, each selected for specific skills that would be essential for an operation this complex on this timeline. Samuel Pierce, team leader. Tactical planning, execution, oversight, 43 successful operations without a single failure. Isabella Moreau, second in command. Infiltration specialist, close quarters expert, psychological operations. 2 men from Tony Bogard's organization in Charleston, both with military backgrounds, both completely reliable. Marcus had vetted them personally. 2 women also from Tony's network, experienced in operations requiring female operatives who could move through certain spaces without triggering suspicion. And 1 technical specialist, a thin, nervous man named David Chen who could intercept phone calls, disable alarm systems, and monitor police communications in real time. They met in a warehouse outside Charleston at 9:15, exactly on schedule. Bella laid out the plan using the intelligence Marcus had forwarded. 6 targets, 3 separate locations initially, but David's phone intercepts had revealed something useful. Eleanor Pritchard was hosting a small gathering at her home that evening. Patricia Crawford and Virginia Morrison would both be attending. 3 targets in 1 location, an opportunity too efficient to pass up. "We hit the party first," Bella explained her finger-tracing routes on a hand-drawn map of Greenwood. "Sedative gas through the ventilation system. They'll be unconscious before they understand what's happening. We extract 3 targets simultaneously, minimal exposure, maximum efficiency." Sam studied the map. "What about the husband, Deputy Sheriff Robert Pritchard? He'll be home." "David will be monitoring all communications. The moment we detect any problem, any alarm, any call for help, we abort and adapt. But the intelligence suggests Pritchard drinks heavily in the evenings. By 9:30, he's usually incapacitated." One of Tony's men, a stocky veteran named James, raised his hand. "And the other 3 targets?" Catherine Walsh will be at evening prayer service at First Baptist Church until 10:30. We take her when she leaves parking lot interception. Judith Brennan will be home alone, husband working night shift at the fire station. Sarah Hendricks will be at her mother's house on the east side of town. 2-person teams for each remaining target. All extractions completed by 11:30 at the latest. The timeline was aggressive, the coordination complex, the risk significant. But everyone in that warehouse understood that this wasn't a normal operation. This was about sending a message so clear, so undeniable that it would echo through the South for generations. They synchronized watches, loaded equipment, reviewed contingencies. By 10 o'clock, 2 vehicles were heading toward Greenwood, South Carolina, carrying 7 people who would fundamentally alter how power and consequence functioned in that small town. The drive took 90 minutes. They arrived at 11:30, parked in predetermined locations on the outskirts of town, and waited for the precise moment when the operation would begin. At 9:27, exactly on schedule, Bella and Sam approached Eleanor Pritchard's house from the rear. It was a modest 2-story home on Maple Street, lights glowing warmly from the windows, voices and laughter audible from inside. David, monitoring from a van 2 blocks away, confirmed through intercepted phone calls that 3 targets were present. Eleanor, Patricia, Virginia. All inside, all unsuspecting, all about to learn that actions had consequences, regardless of how much privilege they thought protected them. The ventilation system for the house was accessible through an external grate near the foundation. Bella worked quickly, attaching a small canister of sedative gas to the intake vent, a military-grade compound that would render everyone inside unconscious within 90 seconds of exposure. She activated the release mechanism and stepped back. Sam counted silently, watching the second hand on his watch tick forward with mechanical precision. 60 seconds. 90 seconds. 120 seconds. The laughter inside the house stopped. Voices became confused, then slurred, then silent. Bella and Sam entered through the back door, which had been left unlocked because in Greenwood, South Carolina in 1946, prominent white people didn't worry about security. Why would they? They owned this town, controlled its power structures, determined who mattered and who didn't. That certainty was about to be corrected. They found Eleanor, Patricia, and Virginia in the living room, all 3 unconscious. Eleanor was slumped in an armchair, Patricia on the couch, Virginia on the floor where she'd collapsed while trying to reach the telephone. But there was a problem. Robert Pritchard, Eleanor's husband, was stirring upstairs. They heard footsteps, heard him calling out groggily. "Eleanor, what's going on? Did someone turn off the radio?" Bella's eyes met Sam's. They had maybe 30 seconds before he came downstairs, before he saw them, before everything became exponentially more complicated. Sam moved to the base of the staircase, waiting. Robert appeared at the top of the stairs, swaying slightly, clearly, drunk but not incapacitated enough. He looked down, saw Sam, a black man, standing in his living room, and his hand immediately went to the gun he kept in his waistband even when off duty. "Who the hell are you? What are you doing in my—" Bella moved like water, coming up behind Robert from the upstairs hallway where she'd circled during those critical seconds. Her arm wrapped around his throat in a precise chokehold, cutting off blood flow to his brain without crushing his windpipe. Non-lethal, professional, exactly calibrated. Robert struggled for maybe 5 seconds before going limp. Bella lowered him carefully to the floor, checked his pulse, confirmed he was unconscious but alive. "That was closer than I'd like," Sam said quietly. "Agreed. Let's move." They carried all 3 women out through the back door, loaded them into the panel truck waiting in the alley behind the house, and drove away. Total time inside the residence, 4 minutes and 30 seconds. By 10:45, Catherine Walsh was being extracted from the church parking lot. She'd just finished evening prayer service, was walking to her car alone, never saw the 2 operatives approaching from behind until the sedative injection hit her bloodstream and the world went dark. At 11:15, Judith Brennan was taken from her home while reading in bed. Her husband was at the fire station, wouldn't be back until morning. She never heard them enter, never knew they were there until it was far too late. Sarah Hendricks proved more difficult. She was visiting her elderly mother, and the mother was still awake, alert, sitting in the living room knitting while Sarah prepared tea in the kitchen. Taking Sarah without alerting the mother required precision timing and perfect coordination. James and his partner waited until Sarah carried the tea tray from the kitchen back toward the living room. The moment she passed through the doorway, James grabbed her while his partner immediately moved to the mother, speaking in a calm, gentle voice. "Ma'am, please don't scream. We're not here to hurt you. Your daughter will be fine. Just stay quiet and this will all be over very quickly." The elderly woman looked at Sarah unconscious in James's arms, looked at the two intruders in her home, and made the calculation that so many people in the South had been making for generations. Resistance meant death, possibly for both of them. Compliance meant, maybe possibly, survival. She nodded silently, tears running down her face. "Thank you, ma'am," James said quietly. "We'll be gone in 30 seconds. You never saw us. You don't know what happened. Your daughter went home early because she wasn't feeling well. Do you understand?" Another nod. James and his partner carried Sarah out, left the elderly woman sitting in her chair knitting needles, still in her hands, crying silently for a daughter she might never see again. But there was one final complication. As they were carrying Sarah to the vehicle, she regained consciousness faster than the sedative should have allowed. She thrashed, screamed, knocked over a metal trash can that clattered loudly in the quiet street. Lights came on in neighboring houses. James had maybe 15 seconds before someone looked out a window, before someone called the sheriff, before the entire operation collapsed. His partner produced another sedative injection, administered it quickly. Sarah's struggles weakened, stopped. They loaded her into the truck and drove away, just as the first curious neighbor opened their front door to investigate the noise. By 11:53, all 6 women were unconscious in the back of a panel truck, heading toward an abandoned warehouse 3 miles outside Greenwood. The building had been empty for years. No neighbors, no traffic, no witnesses. Perfect isolation for what needed to happen next. The truck pulled inside at 12:07 past midnight. 7 operatives unloaded 6 unconscious women and arranged them in a row on the concrete floor. David set up a portable film projector that had been acquired specifically for this operation, aiming it at a blank warehouse wall. Bella produced a handwritten letter from her jacket pocket, 3 pages of careful script that Bumpy had written before they left New York. She'd read it earlier, knew its contents, understood that this was more than just an execution. This was a trial, a judgment, and an education, all compressed into whatever time remained before sunrise. The sedatives began wearing off at 12:14. The 6 women stirred, groaned, opened their eyes to darkness and confusion and the gradually dawning realization that something had gone catastrophically wrong. Their hands were bound with rope. Their mouths were gagged with cloth. They couldn't scream, couldn't call for help, couldn't do anything except look at each other with wide, terrified eyes and at the 7 figures standing in the shadows nearby. Sam Pierce stepped forward into the light cast by a single overhead bulb. His voice was calm, almost gentle, completely devoid of emotion. "My name isn't important. What's important is why you're here and what's going to happen to you in the next 30 minutes. The 6 women made muffled sounds through their gags, struggling against the ropes, eyes darting around, desperately looking for escape that didn't exist. Sam continued as if they hadn't made a sound. "This afternoon at approximately 2:52, you 6 women lynched an elderly black woman named Margaret Johnson. You beat her in an alley, you dragged her to a tree, you made a noose, you hanged her. Then you went shopping. Some of you laughed about it. All of you acted like killing a 73-year-old woman was nothing more than an afternoon's entertainment. Eleanor Pritchard was shaking her head violently, making desperate sounds through the gag, her eyes pleading. "What you didn't know," Sam said, "what you couldn't have known is that Margaret Johnson was the grandmother of Bumpy Johnson. You've probably never heard that name. He's a very powerful man in New York City. One of the most powerful black men in America, actually. And he loved his grandmother more than anything else in the world." Bella started the film projector. The images that Thomas Washington had captured that afternoon flickered to life on the warehouse wall. 6 white women dragging an elderly black woman into an alley. 6 white women beating someone who couldn't defend herself. 6 white women laughing while preparing a noose. The footage was grainy, shot from a distance, but it was unmistakable. Clear. Undeniable. A permanent record of casual cruelty that they'd assumed would carry no consequences. The 6 women watched themselves commit murder, watched themselves laugh, watched themselves return to Main Street like nothing had happened. When the film ended, Sam spoke again. "Mr. Johnson sent us here with very specific instructions. He wants you dead, all 6 of you. And he wants your bodies found in trash bags disposed of like garbage because that's what you are to him. Garbage. Trash. You treated an elderly black woman like garbage, so that's how you'll be disposed of." Patricia Crawford was crying now, shoulders shaking, making high-pitched sounds of terror through the gag. Bella stepped forward and began reading Bumpy's letter. Her voice was clear, precise, making sure every word was heard and understood. "You took from me the one person who loved me without judgment, without fear, without condition. You took from me the woman who raised me after my mother died. You took from me the only family I had left in this world, and you did it because she accidentally bumped into one of you on a street." The letter continued for 3 pages, describing Margaret's life, her kindness, her dignity, her absolute unwillingness to harm anyone. Describing how she'd raised a grandson in a world designed to destroy him. Describing how she'd taught him that real power meant protecting people, not hurting them. "But you killed her anyway," Bella read. "You killed her and laughed about it. So now you're going to learn what real consequences look like. Not the consequences of law, which you've never had to fear, but the consequences that come when you cross the one line that should never be crossed." Eleanor was shaking her head so violently that the gag slipped slightly. She managed to speak, her voice muffled but audible. "Please, please, we didn't know. We'll do anything. We'll pay. We'll confess. Please, we have families, we have children, please." Sam's response was ice cold. "What can you offer Bumpy Johnson? What do you have that matters to him? His grandmother is dead. You can't bring her back. You can't undo what you did. You can't offer him anything except the satisfaction of knowing that you understood finally what it feels like to be powerless. What it feels like to beg for mercy from people who see you as less than human." He pulled out a handgun. Military-issue Colt 1911 suppressor attached. Professional equipment for a professional operation. "You're going to die now. It's going to be quick. 1 shot each. You won't suffer more than absolutely necessary. That's more mercy than you gave Margaret Johnson. She strangled for 3 minutes before she died. You'll be gone in a fraction of a second." The executions were methodical, precise, professional. Sam shot Eleanor Pritchard first. Headshot, point-blank range, dead instantly. Then Patricia Crawford, then Virginia Morrison, then Catherine Walsh, then Judith Brennan, then Sarah Hendricks. 6 shots. 6 deaths, all completed in less than 45 seconds. Time of death, 12:47 past midnight, Friday, July 19th, 1946. Exactly 9 hours and 55 minutes after they had lynched Margaret Johnson. The team worked efficiently. 6 heavy-duty industrial trash bags, the kind used for construction debris. Each body was placed into a bag. The bags were sealed with strong tape. No ceremony, no ritual, just the mechanical process of disposal. They loaded the bags into the truck and drove into Greenwood down Main Street, which was completely deserted at 1:35 in the morning. The streets were dark, the town asleep, unaware that everything was about to change. They parked directly in front of the Greenwood Women's Social Club, the building where Eleanor, Patricia, Virginia, Catherine, Judith, and Sarah had been members, where they'd held meetings and luncheons, where they'd socialized and gossiped and planned community events. The 7 operatives carried the trash bags out of the truck and placed them carefully on the sidewalk side by side, in a neat row, impossible to miss, clearly visible from the street. Bella produced a wooden sign that had been prepared in advance. Carved into the wood in clear, bold letters, "Justice delayed is not justice denied. Bumpy Johnson." She placed the sign in front of the bags, positioned so that anyone approaching would see it immediately, would understand immediately that this wasn't random violence but deliberate consequence. Finally, she placed Margaret's necklace, the one Thomas Washington had retrieved from the alley, on top of the middle bag. The delicate silver chain caught the streetlight, glinting in the darkness, a symbol of the woman whose death had triggered all of this. The team stepped back, looked at their work, and understood that when Greenwood woke up in a few hours, the world would be fundamentally different. Not just for this town, but for every place in the South, where people had assumed that racial violence carried no costs, that prominent white citizens could do whatever they wanted to black people without fear of consequence. That assumption died tonight, displayed in trash bags on Main Street. They got back into their vehicles and drove away out of Greenwood back toward Charleston and Columbia, and eventually scattered across 3 different states. By sunrise, they'd be invisible, untraceable, gone like ghosts that had never existed, except in the nightmares of a town that was about to wake up to a new reality. As the first hints of dawn began lightening the eastern sky, as Greenwood slowly stirred toward consciousness, 6 bodies in trash bags waited on Main Street to deliver a message that would be remembered for generations. When the sun rose over South Carolina that Friday morning, it illuminated a world where power no longer depended solely on skin color, where consequences could reach across state lines, and social hierarchies where an elderly black woman's death mattered enough that 6 prominent white women died in response. Justice delayed is not justice denied, and sometimes when the law fails, justice arrives in forms that the law never anticipated and cannot control. Friday, July 19, 1946. 6:45 in the morning. Mrs. Helen Patterson, a school teacher walking to work, was the first to see them. 6 black trash bags arranged in a perfect row on the sidewalk in front of the Women's Social Club. She stopped, confused, then noticed the dark liquid seeping from the bottom of one bag. Red liquid. Blood. Her scream brought people running. Within 15 minutes, Sheriff William Hartwell and 3 deputies were on scene. They opened the bags, found 6 bodies, all white women, all shot in the head, all prominent members of the community. The wooden sign stood like a gravestone. Justice delayed is not justice denied. Bumpy Johnson. The FBI arrived from Columbia by noon. Special Agent Robert Morrison spent 3 days interviewing witnesses, examining crime scenes, reviewing evidence. Or rather, reviewing the complete absence of evidence. No fingerprints, no witnesses, no leads. Professional work by people who knew exactly what they were doing. On Sunday afternoon, Morrison called Sheriff Hartwell into his temporary office. "Sheriff, I'm going to be completely honest. This investigation is going nowhere. The killers are long gone. You have no witnesses, no physical evidence, no leads. More importantly, pursuing this case aggressively could get you killed." He leaned forward. Bumpy Johnson just demonstrated he can reach into a small South Carolina town and execute 6 white women in their homes within hours. You really want to provoke him further. Hartwell received an anonymous phone call that evening. A calm voice said simply, "Stop looking. The man you're hunting can erase this entire town in one night. Your choice, Sheriff." The case was closed by Monday morning, officially unsolved. But while Greenwood reeled in shock and fear, another funeral was taking place on the other side of town, in the small cemetery, where black families had been burying their dead for generations. Margaret Johnson was laid to rest on Sunday, July 21st. Nearly every black resident of Greenwood attended. They stood in respectful silence as the preacher spoke of a life lived with dignity, of a woman who'd harmed no one and asked for nothing except to be left in peace. Bumpy Johnson stood at the graveside in an expensive black suit, his face expressionless, his eyes hidden behind dark glasses. He didn't speak, didn't cry publicly, didn't show any emotion at all. He simply placed a single white rose on the coffin as it was lowered into the ground. Across town, 6 separate funerals were being held for 6 women whose families would never learn who killed them or why. Though everyone understood the truth, they could never speak aloud. After the service, as people began leaving, Thomas Washington approached Bumpy hesitantly. He held out the silver necklace, the one he'd found in the alley where Margaret died. "Mr. Johnson, sir, I thought you'd want this back." Bumpy took the necklace, held it in his hand, stared at it for a long moment. His fingers closed around it tightly, and for the first time since learning of his grandmother's death, Bumpy Johnson's carefully maintained composure cracked. A single tear rolled down his cheek. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for everything you did, for being brave when it mattered." Marcus Webb stood beside Bumpy as Thomas walked away. After a long silence, Marcus asked, "Do you regret it?" Bumpy's response was immediate. "Regret what? Proving that justice doesn't discriminate by skin color, teaching them that every life has value. My grandmother taught me that real power isn't about revenge, it's about protection, about balancing the world when it tilts too far in one direction." He looked at the fresh grave. "She's gone. I can't bring her back. But I made absolutely certain that the people who killed her understood the cost of what they'd done. That's not revenge, Marcus. That's just mathematics. An equation balanced." Bumpy left Greenwood that afternoon and never returned. But the story of what happened that July week in 1946 spread through the South like wildfire. A whispered warning that echoed through every town where racial violence had once seemed consequence-free. Never underestimate the love of a man for his family. 1 year later, not a single incident of racial teaching had occurred in Greenwood. The message had been received, understood, and remembered. Thomas Washington opened a photography studio with quiet financial backing from an anonymous benefactor in New York. His work would later document the civil rights movement, preserving history for future generations. The wooden sign disappeared from police evidence 3 months after the murders. 40 years later, it resurfaced in a museum exhibition on crime and justice in America. An artifact of the day power shifted in ways the law never anticipated. Justice delayed is not justice denied. And sometimes when the law fails to protect the innocent, justice arrives in forms that the law cannot control. But history will never forget.